going to say, yes, this is definitely 100% the case, because I think there's just too much mystery shrouding this whole thing. It's extremely suspicious that this is only just suddenly a thing out of nowhere, and I tend to think there are a lot of co-opted truth movements that kind of happen, which tend to lead us in certain directions that may not necessarily always be in our best interest. So we need to be careful, we need to be a little bit apprehensive about some of these things, where we are in the timeline.
Just how far has that light actually gone? And where do we actually stand in the timing of things? You have the non-religious thinkers who go down the Tartarian route, which implies that there was an ancient, super advanced civilization that used what we call antiquitech, or buildings that were around these grand cathedrals, for example, during this time, were actually tools and mechanisms to harvest energy. Enormous cataclysm of some kind that basically just annihilated that civilization. And then there was a reset of a sorts. And a lot of these cities were kind of repopulated after this global cataclysmic event, which in some parts of the earth melted these cities into piles of molten mess, And a lot of them also were buried under layers of mud. Some very shallow, some deeper than others, but there seems to have been a huge shift in the land itself, and everything was just decimated. Humanity was extremely advanced, and after the cataclysm, evil secret societies of some kind seemed to move in to these cities and reclaim them all, and then repopulate them with people that just came out of nowhere. But the founders of these cities are literally the people who found the cities, not built them. And then they made up histories and lies to basically say that they were older than they actually are. And the history of how they were built, they know, and they've basically made up just an entire false narrative to explain where all these things come from. That's our history as far as we're concerned. That's what's taught to us in the textbooks and on TV and by our authorities. So we have this belief that we live in the year 2023, before Christ and after Christ. We believe we're 2023 years after Christ. In fact, that's just not the case at all. It seems like what they call the Dark Ages, they never actually happened at all. And that 1,000 years they claim, which is in darkness, which we have no real solid documentation of, because it was just such a hellish time to be on Earth, where mankind was plunged just into a religious hole of some kind. The truth is that never happened, and we actually are in the year 1000 and something. No, that 1,000 years did happen. And that is not a dark age. It was the 1,000 years of Christ reigning on earth with the resurrected saints. Most of Revelations has already come to pass. The veils have already been poured out on the earth. The mark of the beast has already come and gone. And the war between the Antichrist and the beast and Jesus Christ and his spiritual army has happened. Just resurrection has already happened. Christ has been here for 1,000 years. He's already ruled for 1,000 years. And then at the end of the 1,000 years, it says Satan is released out of the pit, and he's allowed to rule for a little season. If this is the little season at the end of the millennial reign, and we are the people living in it, then we are the people in Revelations 20, where it says the dead who didn't know Christ or weren't around before Christ turned up and didn't have a chance to live in the millennial kingdom are raised. And they live in this time, this little season. I think people didn't quite grasp that immediately. They were like, well, what did you just say? Gospel truth? I don't know. This is what everyone's on right now. The only verse, this theory I've just said about we are the last people, we are the resurrected people who died before Christ. Basically, the war in heaven's already happened. The 7 veils have been poured out on earth. And the 7 veils are pretty nasty. The seals are opened, the trumpets are blown, the veils, are lit on the earth, and it's basically just death and destruction all over the earth. Blood becoming the sea, a third of the animals dying, hail and fire falling from heaven, lightnings, earthquakes, just utter destruction of everything. You know, the world is just totaled, and so are the people on it. And then what is left in terms of remnants is this final battle between the Antichrist, who rides the beast, or the beast system, which is created, and the people who follow it, basically, against the armies of Jesus. And basically, you know, Babylon falls in 18, and this causes the merchants of the earth to weep, because no one is able to buy their products anymore. Revelations 18, because it kind of tells us what Babylon is, and Babylon isn't a city necessarily anymore in this context. It seems like Babylon is the method in which people can buy and sell stuff. So it's kind of the infrastructure of the world in a way. And if society collapses, which is what we live in now, which you would define as Babylon, then that means people can no longer earn money. And as that is the system people use to gain food and survive, that's going to be a big problem, you know, for a lot of people who rely on the system, you know. And obviously all the rich men in the world and the rich women and the people that are high up in these things, once it falls, are going to be upset because their wealth literally means nothing anymore. They have nothing of actual value they can trade for the things necessary to survive anymore. So that's just in passing. Let's move on. It says here, you know, in 19, the marriage between Jesus and his bride, who has prepared herself and clothed in white linen. So I think that's obviously symbolic of the born-again Christians, the people who have been preparing themselves for Jesus' arrival. We are Jesus' bride, you know. It says here, a white horse whose rider is called Faithful and True is introduced. With justice he makes war. So Jesus Christ is the rider mentioned in chapter 12, and John references Psalms 2:9 when he writes, he will rule them with an iron scepter. So Jesus comes here, you know, to bring war, not peace, basically, against those who obviously have fully rejected God in every heinous way. He says this is when the first war between the people of God and the rest of the world takes place. After the war is finished, the beast and the false prophets are taken captives and thrown into the lake of fire. Okay, while all the other enemy combatants are killed and the corpses are left out in the field for the birds of the sky to devour their flesh. So there's a horrible war after the total destruction of everything, and this is kind of the last mopping up of the corruption that was around during that time. It says, you know, Jesus returns to earth, followed by the armies of heaven, which are seen riding white horses and dressed in fine linen. The beast and his false prophets make war with the armies of Christ, but are defeated. In the aftermath of their defeat, the Antichrist and false prophets are cast into the lake of fire, which burns forever. 20. Revelations. This is kind of what this whole concept that if, you know, in terms of the millennial reign, if it's happened, this is where we are. Okay, this is where we're up to in the story, which means we are pretty much near the end. You know, and all those people we see who are stereotypically holding up signs on street corners saying the end is nigh, perhaps we're a lot closer to the truth of that matter than we initially thought they were stereotypically. Maybe they didn't even know what they truly meant when they were saying the end is nigh. People would dream dreams and have visions during this time. And it says here, you know, Satan is bound in the abyss for 1,000 years. The saints who died are resurrected and begin their 1,000-year reign with Christ. After the 1,000 years, Satan is released from the abyss to deceive the nations and gather Gog and Magog and the people of the world to encircle the camp of saints and the city of Jerusalem. Fire comes down from God out of heaven and devours them, and Satan is destroyed. Finally, the wicked dead and all those who died during the 1,000-year reign of Christ are resurrected and judged. This translation is from the KJV, okay? And I'm not here to argue about what is and isn't the right book to use, but let's just read this together. Okay, so Revelations 20. And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit, and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. And after that, he must be loosed a little season. And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witnesses of Jesus, and for the word of God, and which they had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had they received the marks on their foreheads or in their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. So this is the millennial kingdom. And those who get to be in the millennial kingdom were the martyrs for Jesus. Those who saw him during his time and lived with him and were beheaded for his sake and killed for his sake, you know. But it says here, this is an interesting verse. But the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished. But then it mysteriously says, this is the first resurrection. But then after that, in the next verse, in 6, it says, blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death has no power. But they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. So listen to that, okay? So let's read number 6 again, reinterpret it. It says here, those in the first resurrection get to reign with Christ for 1,000 years. And in the previous verse, this is the first resurrection. It seems like this section here, but the rest of the dead live not again until the 1,000 years were finished, shouldn't really be here. I'm not trying to add or remove to the Bible or anything. I'm not trying to corrupt anything. This is an interpretation issue or a translation issue, because of the way they structure language compared to English. But the first resurrection are those who get to reign with Christ for 1,000 years. After that, the rest of the dead live not again until the 1,000 years were finished. Okay, so it feels like this shouldn't be here. It should be below number 6, maybe. It should. This little section should be here, maybe, just before 7. Okay, I feel like that should be just before 7, rather than randomly just jammed here with this is the first resurrection next to it. That doesn't make any sense, because so the rest of the dead live not again until the 1,000 years were finished. And it says, when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, and the rest of the dead live not again until the 1,000 years. So the rest of the dead are somehow born again into the world. Their souls are in some way, it's like they've been stored somewhere, and they get to come back, but they have to live during Satan's little moment. You know, that's what I'm saying here. And it's all hinged on this section, in Revelations 5 through to 7. All of Revelations 20 really is what it's talking about here, but it mainly starts with, you know, people get to reign with Christ for 1,000 years. Blessed are those that get to take part in the first resurrection, because they get to be with Christ for 1,000 years. This is the first resurrection. And then the rest of the dead get to come back after the 1,000 years, when Christ is no longer reigning, and they get to be in a little season where he's loosed out of his prison, where Satan is loosed. Yet the next sentence says, this is the first resurrection. But this little sentence, this is the first resurrection, is talking about this. And it says, Satan shall go out and deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth. Now, deceive the nations. You know, if this is true, then it makes sense that why we're so confused about who we are and when we are. We don't know what peoples we actually are. We've been utterly lied to about our history and our origins through scientism and obviously other manipulated religions out there and lies. Our timeline is completely messed up. In terms of deceive the nations, Satan has done just that, if that's where we live, if we are in his little season. We are utterly, completely lost. We have no idea who we are, or when we are. And we barely even understand where we are, considering all the deceptions around, the heliocentric model and the rest. We don't really know anything about existence at all. We've been utterly deceived during this time, and our history books are utter lies. And he's gonna gather Gog and Magog together for battle. Now, I'm not here to argue about who Gog and Magog is, but the point is, he gets these peoples together, and there's a lot of them. Millions, trillions of people, well, not trillions, but billions of people, Satan's given his chance. And basically those who wish to rebel and have that nature within them and didn't want to be saved during this time will side with him. And will go and fight Jesus, basically. Who sees you when you're sleeping and knows when you're awake, and he lives in the North Pole. It's kind of like Santa Claus is a satanic twist on Jesus Christ. Revelations is telling us here there'll be a 1,000-year reign of Christ. Then the dead will raise after that, who didn't know Christ, maybe beforehand, or lived during the time of Christ but denied him, or were evil and sinners. They're resurrected in the world with Satan for his little season after the 1,000 years here in verse 7. And then he'll gather an army to go and do one last battle against Jesus at the center of the earth. But then fire came down from God out of heaven and just destroyed the enemy instantly. And that's basically it. And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone where the beast and the false prophet are. And it says here they shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. But I even though I'm inclined to believe something akin to that may be happening, I think it's likely just utter annihilation that they're finally done for, And I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it, and whose face the earth and the heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the book, according to their works. So, interesting phraseology here, but it's implying after this, every human that ever lived is then resurrected fully. Not just those who lived during the time before Christ, but it's kind of like even those who died during this whole tribulation period at the end rise again. So it's implying that those who do come back to live in Satan's little kingdom after the 1,000 years, as mentioned here, aren't resurrected in a sense as adults who can think consciously. It's almost like they're born again into the world. It's like as the world repopulates during this 1,000 years, it's like these babies or infants are born into the world, and as they grow older, they fully come into who they are, like we do, like every human being you've ever met does in this world, We're all raised from a baby, aren't we? From a mother and child. And I find it interesting that there's this phenomena recent. Maybe that is what was going on. Maybe that's what this is talking about, and where all these children just randomly appeared from. It's actually, they were kind of just birthed into the earth in a way. And, they weren't resurrected as fully grown adults, which is what the resurrection implies would happen. These people who the rest of the dead live not again are people who have to live a full life again from birth till death, So they're not resurrected, more so re-injected into the earth. Their soul is implanted back into it through the birthing process. Okay, but I think after all this destruction, after the final battle, where they encircle the camp of saints and are burnt by God, I'm guessing that's when the final second resurrection truly happens. And everybody who died is resurrected in the form as they were. So adults and children in between of all ages and sizes, whatever, they're all just literally brought back from the dead and manifest in front of God. That's the final judgment. That's the final judgment. It says here, the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them. So this is everybody. Everybody who died has come back. No matter who you are, when you lived, every single human will have to give an account and comes back, basically, before God. And they were judged, every man according to their works. faith without works is dead. It's enough that not to believe in Christ is one thing. But if you did believe in Christ, yet your works didn't reflect that, then I suppose responsibility is higher up on you, isn't it? If you're going to be a Christian and walk in the way, you better act like it, not just say it. You better walk the walk, not just talk the talk. So I'm thinking there's some grace here for people who truly never knew Christ, like this last period of time. If this is the little season, and we're all here now, just about to have this epic battle where we're convinced to go and fight against something we in the next maybe 100 years are all about to be convinced to go and attack something is actually Jesus, and we're all about to die and be destroyed. Everybody on this earth knows about Jesus. Jesus is everywhere right now. He might not be physically with us, but everyone knows his name and everyone knows his story. We don't live in a Jesus-less world, so it's not like we don't have a chance right now to discover him and understand what it's all about. Everyone has a chance to at least humour the idea, So it would be plausible that this could be our chance to get right with God, before the final judgment. And this is our chance as people who lived before Christ appeared on earth to be put back into the earth as a chance to. Because don't forget, the people who lived with Christ, they had their chance right there. They saw him, they saw it all happen. The people who lived after that during the millennial kingdom, anyone born into the millennial kingdom, well, of course they're going to love Christ and worship Christ and be saved because he's right there. But what about us? What about the people who didn't? Well, I'm saying us, but if we are those people who didn't live during a time when he existed, where's our chance to be saved and have our souls redeemed? Well, maybe this is it. A lot of people instead, alternative to this, are obviously waiting for the millennial kingdom to happen. They're waiting for all of the revelation, the end times events to happen. They're waiting for all the trumpets to be blown and the vials to be poured, and the seals to be broken. They're waiting for the mark of the beast still and all this stuff. You're waiting for the wrong thing. It's already happened. You've just been utterly lied to about where you stand in the time period. Our history has been utterly expunged and twisted and lied to. And it's fascinating, like I said at the start, it does seem, through basic observation, never mind following just scripture or what's written down in books, just observing the earth, something absolutely awful happened that melted cities, leveled landscapes, buried people and cultures, just reset the earth. All the trees are new. Something happened, and the New Age types and the Gnostic types call it the Great Reset. The Christians call it the end times revelation event, and then the millennial reign. This idea that there is evidence for this through the architecture that was around, all this wonderful architecture that people struggle to understand how we managed to build, especially during a time when everyone was using horses and carriages. These epically large, intricate designed buildings, Well, the stones have a date marked on them usually. And for one example, there's loads of stones out there that look like they have something like 1760 written on there. But on closer inspection, the one is an I. It's not a number, it's a letter, for example. So this means that saying that was actually saying this is the year 760 of the Lord. I being a replacement for J for Jesus, which wasn't around then. So it's I 760, not 1760. And this is kind of what they've been doing. They've been defacing all these stones and adding ones in front of them. So we think we're living in the we're living in the year 2000, when really we might be living in the year 1000, just a couple of 100 years after the great reign of Jesus Christ. But again, we wouldn't know what year we're actually in if this is true. It means they've literally just given us a random arbitrary date and said, yeah, that's when you live. This great deception is built on the biggest of lies, if this is true. And I don't want to say with any authority, I can't ignore this theory knocking about everywhere, because people are losing themselves to it and obsessing over it to the point where, that it's one of those reality shifters. People say, well, there's so many signs are happening right now that prove this is end times about to happen, and we are about to be taken up, and Jesus is about to come back, and rule for 1,000 years. And It's kind of, we can see the signs. It's kind of like, well, the devil can make up signs. The devil can perform signs and wonders. He can make it look like Revelations is unfolding before your eyes, even though it's already happened. He can do that. It's well within his power and ability. You could be being massively deceived. Keep your eyes and faith in Jesus. That's all you can do. Because we're in such a weird time frame and time zone in all this deception now that we literally cannot actually understand or know where we are in the process. In the spirit of no man knows the day or the hour, I'm going to have to say, you're just going to have to make sure you're right with God yourself and get your family in order. This little season doesn't have a time frame, and maybe there's a reason for that. That's when the final judgment happens. That's when the fire comes down from heaven from God and wipes us all out, and then the final judgment. And that time zone, which is described here as a little season loosed out of his prison, just for a little bit, isn't defined because we don't know how long it's going to be. That's up to us. It's up to us when we choose to fully give in to all the lies and be deceived to the point. It's how long can we last before we've been utterly corrupted again to the point of waging war against Jesus Christ once again. A lot of people are still being saved today. And I think he'll give us as much time as we need to make the right choice, I hope. It seems that way. But yeah. And this is our chance to get right, basically. That's what you believe if you believe in the narrative of the millennial kingdom. That's who we are. That's how it's described in the Bible, and Revelations. That's who those people are, and that's who we are. And maybe this explains a strange phenomena people have had where they describe having past lives. You get those people out there adamant that I've lived another life as another person, And you get some lunatics saying I was King Henry VIII or I was Cleopatra or something to muddy the waters. But maybe there's something to be said for those people out there who are really certain that they've lived a life before. It's kind of like, this is like, I feel like I'm another person in another person's body. Maybe all these feelings and thoughts revolving around this idea, although they can be manipulated and twisted into making people believe things like reincarnation exist, which is an endless cycle of soul recycling, which I don't believe is true. Perhaps there is something to be said for a loving, caring God allowing us to come back one last time. So it's not reincarnation, it's just what I said it is. It's a loving and merciful God giving us a chance to do it right. It is. You don't get another chance after this. And then in the end, everybody gets brought back. Everybody. That Revelations 5 was talking about. We are the rest of the dead that live not again until the 1,000 years were finished. Is that us? And we are the people just before the second resurrection, where everybody gets to come back for the final judgment. Don't take what I say as gospel truth. I'm not a preacher. Okay, so we're told that's energy coming from solar flares, sparking up the ions in the atmosphere to make this colourful display. Or is it the throne of God ruling, emanating his light out and his energy and his glory? Because the colours that are described in the Bible for the throne of God are identical to the colours that are described that you see when you see the northern lights. And it says here, he deceives all the nations. Perhaps the whole point of the millennial reign was so Christ could build up the earth and its infrastructure for 1,000 years into something impossible for Satan to destroy. Something so complex, so infrastructurally built out with canals and cathedrals, cities and waterworks and pipes and undergrounds, everything just built out to the max. So when the devil's released after his 1,000-year imprisonment, he is going to try his best to erase as much as he possibly can. But he just can't. It's impossible because Christ built up too much in those 1,000 years with his saints. And he was basically laying out a world for us to come back into, to have that chance to know him. So it seems like there was a purpose there, You take Christ at his word, which is good enough for me. I'm not going to make him a liar. I believe him when he told those people in front of him he was coming back in their lifetime. I can only work backwards from there now. Tribulation did indeed happen. This earth has gone through a horrible cataclysm. that fits and matches the description of tribulation perfectly. And yes, Christ did rule for 1,000 years with his saints. It's all there.